I heard the bathysphere has a nice view. That could be a good way to get a lay of the land.
Too risky.
What?
New tracks like who's that? I'm new, come back better than last. Yeah, it's a new me, never gonna look back. I'm never gonna look back. Cause damn, I was built to last. You move slow and I move fast, and that's facts. Only I can make a change. Slowly take a step today. I will never be the same. Cause that's what it takes.
Yes, Arcane's most underrated scene comes at the halfway point of the show in episode 5, which it itself is sandwiched in between and cut up between a bunch of very memorable moments. And that's sort of the story for the entirety of Arcane. Really, the one criticism of the show is its Netflix-style editing. But in the end, I think we all still love it, and this scene in particular is one that you have to look backwards at. Go back in time, and with the schema of finishing the show, you can actually see how potent that this moment was for this character. The parkour scene means a lot, I believe, to the production company Fortiche, to the culture of Zaun, and specifically, yes, to Vi. And hopefully this essay will elucidate why it is the most underrated scene. Before, in my review of Arcane's first season, I said every scene steals the show. But with a story like this that has as many crossing plots and jumping cuts as Arcane, there's going to be a lot of scenes that are sort of left over. They miss a crescendo that they could have had otherwise. But also there are scenes that give their emotional payoff mostly after you finish the show and then you look back. Before we can talk about this particular apple pie that is the underrated scene, we have to first invent the universe. We need to talk about why Arcane is edited the way that it is. See, Netflix shows, they're often criticized for their focus on character back and forth dialogue jump cuts, and then dramatic scene switching between more character-focused moments. This style of scene composition actually kind of works perfect for Arcane, mostly. And most of the time, even in Arcade, it evades the sins, because they have this almost sci-fi approach to a myriad of the world-focused moments. But this show, we've all seen it, we all love it, we know it's so much bigger than itself, and deserves more attention to be brought back. And backwards is the best way to begin to talk about the most underrated scene, with its potency only honest when going back from what we know of the story so far, and with a bit of context from its inspiration. Every scene that I want to talk about in today's video, it was a contender actually for most underrated scene, and this was the first one that actually came to mind whenever I first conceived of this video topic. The brothel scene is one that is sort of laughed at for being cheesy and strange, weird in a lot of different ways, but mainly because of the fan service aspect of it, which I even had an entire concept of defending fan service if it does actually serve the purpose of furthering the plot as well as fleshing out character details. Yeah, no, I will defend it to the death, and I actually do think that this scene is pretty well done for being fan service, especially compared to some egregious examples like the Imagine Dragons scene in Arcane, but overall, the brothel scene shows one particular aspect that a lot of people sort of missed here. Please consider that this is an adult establishment, and Vi, since she was a literal child, has not been back to Zaun. She's been in jail. And not only that, but very clearly because of the fan service elements, where we do see Vi hitting on Caitlyn and Caitlyn being so naive and innocent, it actually shows their age. It shows their immaturity. So the strangeness of the scene actually does serve that purpose. But keep in mind that these are young adults at this moment, but mainly that Vi was a child when she was last in Zaun, and seemingly knows very well how this establishment actually works, how to potentially get information out of people by pretending to work there, knows the people who work here to a friendly degree. And not only that, but walking in has complete swagger and confidence. And if you were to relate that to the moralities of modern society, it does seem a little tragic and sad that a child was exposed to that, as well as the rest of Zon. With their freedom and their art and their culture, a lot of the oppression also created a toxic environment, literally, but then also in respects to situations like this. So yes, well, I think this scene is most notable for what you see in a lot of YouTube thumbnails, which is going to be the fan service element to it. There are layers that kind of reach a little bit deeper that if you look closely, especially with anything that sort of peels back, you know, what Zon really is and that culture, you're gonna find a tremendous amount of depth, because Arcane is not really about Piltover versus Zon. It's really a story of Zon and the children of Zon. And moving backwards now, sequencing to the previous scene actually in the storyline here, we have Vi leading Caitlyn to a food vendor stall in seemingly the bustling market of the Undercity to have what is, at first glance is just like she's just there for the childhood favorite meal of hers, but then of course it's revealed later that it was to get a lead. Here though, we get to meet this awesome food vendor who is just so charismatic, no words whatsoever, but then also more story details, or I would say more peeling of the back of the layers of what really is the society of Zon, again without words, which is something Arcane does so fantastically. Basically, we see that Caitlyn is disgusted by the meal that Vi is eating. This, I think, is just glancing at first glance, but really, it punched me instantaneously. Me as a vegan, I know the importance of what the different societies' meals have, and this is clearly purely a meat-centric society. I know it's just one stall out of many, but you also have to keep in mind that there is no room, there is no space for any other sort of livestock. There is no possibility of growing any sort of green. There is going to be no fruits, no vegetables. The only way that Zon can survive, this is going to be in terms of commerce, in terms of how they make their money, but also how they literally feed themselves, is from the water, which, if you remember Silco saying, the water is toxic, which means the food is toxic, the air itself is toxic. The lifeblood of Zon is toxicity. And so another tragic point here is that Vi's favorite meal growing up as a kid is a literal bowl of toxicity, of living things that have been, butchered, carcasses, compared to Piltover, where they have such luxury, where they can have cupcakes and sandwiches, but then also just leave them lying around, as we see in the very first episodes, in the first scenes of the first episode, making it very clear the life of Piltovers, the culture of Piltover versus the forced life and culture of Zon. And we need to keep this all in mind, the oppressive nature of Piltover, as well as what that means for Vi's arc moving forward. So what makes this scene good? In terms of the animation, in terms of the spectacle, it is exemplary of what Fortiche has done with the rest of Arcane. Firstly, the perfect animation when it comes to the movement of Vi. I watch parkour pretty much all day. Every day I do a little bit of parkour, and I don't feel like this is too fantastic. And also, pairing with that amazing animation quality and attention to detail is going to be the camera, which, by the way, this is virtual, it's not a real camera, and yet it feels like it. The subtle shaking, the swaying, the panning, and the positioning of the cameras all really reminds of if this was an actual filmed parkour montage. And I'm gonna come out and say it, it's scenes like this, and especially this one, that makes Arcane so believable, which is a science fantasy cartoon that I have been completely immersed in. So just technically, it's a good scene, but what makes it special? And what makes it underrated? And why are we coming back to it now? because I don't think you guys realize how important this scene is to Fortiche, to the character of Vi, and what it really means, I guess, in terms of a culture of Zaun. See, Fortiche is a French production company, and it's definitely not lost on them that parkour is a French sport. Not only that, but Fortiche has been working with Riot Games since the Jinxed video, and they also worked specifically on the Echo video, and basically when it comes to the art, the image, and kind of the vibe of Zaun specifically, Fortiche are the ones who basically made it what it is. So yeah, you could say the scene is a little masturbatory, but it's kind of a love letter to themselves, or really it's a love letter to parkour as a sport, parkour as a way of life almost, at least when in terms of the characters in this game. And then also, yeah, to this fantasy universe that they've been making in partnership with Riot. Parkour is an expression against oppression and the cathartic art of movement against societal conformity. Basically, yeah, it kind of represents everything that is polar opposite to the ethos of Piltover. And this is really important for the character Vi, who's just now out of prison, having this moment of release of freedom and enjoying herself. The excitability and the fun of the scene definitely is shown and wears off on the viewer, but the true importance of it, you can really only tell by looking back now at this character who we know loves Zaun, loves what it was and what it could be, but in the end, it's not meant to be. And I know it sounds like I'm projecting a lot on here, but I basically just want to wrap this up by saying that Arcane is effectively built together by parasiting a lot of concepts that you see in the real world. The geopolitical situations or urban environmental problems. Things like this are all kind of thrown in here and patchwork together in order to create immersive experience by literally displaying fan service moments that take you out of the fantasy and immerse you in the reality. How these fantastic settings can affect the everyday life, unreal life, but make it real for you inside of Arcane. How the sci-fi could be actual science, and so on and so forth. And especially when it comes to the music video moments, I think we kind of begin to understand that with Arcane, but when it comes to more tame moments like this, that don't have these giant crescendos, the parkour scene, especially in between a lot of other bigger, emotionally impacting moments, looking back now, hopefully you can understand what it means to people who practice parkour, the environments that it is practiced in, and the symbolism of it as well, coming from a French company trying to show off the world that they have, had a hand in developing. And I think, yeah, the best way, the most optimal way, and my favorite way is whenever there is a scene here in Arcane of characters running through the world, because that's what I would want to do.